Thank you for being here. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Andrea Omicini. You know, the title of the presentation is very interesting, about explainable pervasive intelligence with self-explaining agents. So you're working on this since a couple of years, right? More or less. But first of all, Professor Omicini is full professor of computer science, University of Bologna. Okay? He published extensively, more than 350 articles, mainly in the area of multi-agent systems, but also in the area of applied logics. And he is involved indeed in many research projects, European research projects. The last one is named Stairway, with the last two letters AI, okay? And is also in the emeritus member of the board of directors of the European Association for Multi-Agent Systems, EuroMAS. And please welcome Professor Andrea Omicini.
I hope you can hear me. First of all, thank Giancarlo Gian for the introduction and also for inviting me here, and also, of course, I extend this to all the organizers here. And yeah, it's right. We are working on this specific topic. Well, maybe something more than 2 years, just because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had a sort of a meeting with the typical meeting with your group of PhD students and collaborators, and I was basically presenting them with a new platform that I believed it was a good starting point for some work that they could do and we could do together. And after that, one of the new PhD students at the time, it was Giuseppe Pisano, and we're now working in Luxembourg with Alma and other nice guys, asked me, okay, good, Andrea, but where is the paper with those things written? And I said, there is no paper, just made things up. and then, of course, I had a chance to write it, and I was forced basically to write it, and then things happened, and you know how things go in this kind of setting. Okay, so now here we are. This is the keynote, so I know from a very long experience that typically when you start in the after lunch, basically people tend to slow down their brain activity and die or just sleep, okay? And so you are supposed to keep them awake with some funny things that I'm not really good at doing, but I've seen a lot of keynotes, and I remember, well, you are supposed never to meet your heroes, and like 20 years ago, I met one of them, and it was a speech about his early career achievements, and the question time was basically a list of, yeah, but this is not relevant, yeah, but this is not important, and basically the only important thing were the results of his like 25 years before. And recently I read a paper on another hero of mine, and I'm still using his paper, or her, I don't know, just censor, who knows. Basically recalling his early results and claiming that not just they were the only relevant things in the area, basically, but also the later work even didn't force him or her, who knows, to change the way they were presented in the 70s or something like that. Okay, so this is what I call the old man speech, but you don't get that. First of all, I'm not that old, okay? Old, but not that old, and I'm not even half famous those guys there, so I cannot afford that, okay? So, what I will do, since I'm not really good at those things with like PowerPoint presentation that with very boomerish things that typically we do with effects and things like that. I just use plain Beamer. So I'm not really good at keynote presentation, but still, Giancarlo keep on inviting. Okay, so you get the old yet not so old man speech. So basically what I will do is to pretend that I'm trying to introduce you to a very huge perspective for the research in the years to come, but actually what I'm trying to prove is I still got it. Okay, I'm old, but still a researcher that can say new things. So basically this is my focus. And then of course, you'll see whether this will happen. And of course, I had a bet with my young fella at home. I was, well, they told me, well, use that if you can. Well, you know, things get in the way when you try to be a researcher. People tend to give you assignments of any sort. I'm not yet still the chair of the department, but I'm quite near to that. Still, I'm trying to stay in the research as much as I can, okay? So what I'm going to talk about today, again, personal details that you're not really interested in, but you can just get it. So when I started this activity some years ago, like 30, okay, we were a lot in the discussion of programming languages and components. I was there in the 80s, okay? So it's something more than 30 years ago. And the discussion was about, I don't know, inheritance versus delegation, what are the objects, which kind of complexity can we face with this kind of components. And then of course, things got stabilized in some way, we got around. And then we decided that that was done, and we moved toward ages with several different ideas about that, several different definitions, technologies, very prototypical ones. We basically kept our focus on components, just a new kind of components for new kinds of systems, okay? So, since the very beginning, it was about, first of all, about the soft engineering. The soft engineering abstractions by which we could conceive new kind of system and grow the sort of complexity that we're able to face, okay? So today, we basically talk about components. And of course, we need to talk about pervasive intelligence. And I was there at the very beginning, again, personal, not required details. But the very beginning was not so easy, because my papers were about, like 30 years ago, about, I don't know, logic programming languages in very small devices, and at the time, very small devices did not exist, okay? And so I got some problems in getting my papers accepted, like years of rejection. And anyway, nowadays things have happened. So we have accepted that we have pervasive devices, pervasive computation, pervasive communication, we have pervasive data, knowledge everywhere. We have now machine learning, we have AI, we have finally working at the time talking about AI. Well, was not so accepted, in particular in the engineering community. Okay? So today, I feel quite safe in giving a speech about pervasive intelligence systems. So today we're talking about the nature of components in pervasive intelligence system, in particular when we're looking at the nature as the main abstractions for the development of the discipline of software engineering. Okay? So, of course, in the same span of time, what happened is that we had a lot of thoughts, a lot of developments, a lot of ideas about how the discipline of software engineering for intelligent systems should be like. And so there is a very huge umbrella that I just call agent-oriented software engineering, where we collectively did a lot of things, like technologies, methodologies, languages, and we did understand that, of course, the right sort of agent, whatever it is, could be the right abstraction in order to build a proper discipline for the engineering of distributed pervasive system, because it's a unit that encapsulates whatever we want there, basically. So, computational autonomy, autonomous communication, autonomous action, C2A-ness. But then, of course, the same holds for intelligent systems, where we use agents to encapsulate knowledge, intelligence, goal, deliberation, okay? But, well, at the time, for decades, these two notions, these two ideas, have just the same name, but we're basically two very different things, okay? And so we did have something like weak and strong agents, and quite famous Jennings and Breuer definition, and we, of course, we called them stupid agents, and not so stupid agents, because people said that they were not so really successful at the time. But now, things have changed. We do have some intelligence that we can refer. We know how to really build some intelligence component. We know that we can add some sort of intelligence to almost any kind of component. The pervasive computation has become powerful enough to at least give space to a situation like that. Okay, so we start from now. We can start this talk or perspective by assuming that we may share the view that agents can work as a fundamental abstraction for the engineering of distributed pervasive intelligence. But of course, two things. In the same way as we spent the 80s trying to understand what objects were, and we finally get some agreement. Still today we do have languages like JavaScript that just encompasses everything that was done in the 80s with no choices. So we have whatever notion of object was at the time discussed. Okay. Nowadays we need to finally come to some shared agreement to which model, which architecture, what agent should be in order to work in quite a general way as this kind of fundamental brick for intelligence system. Okay, and maybe they may become also some starting point for the new generation. The generation of Asian programming languages now is quite keenly required. Okay, so what we do already know about this, we just take quite subtle things. Okay, so we do have the light side. Okay, with we have rational agent architecture, we have VDI architecture, we have VDI logic. So we have the logic part, we have the plans in sort of logic-based plan is most of the agent language like JSON, where most of the things we have there are on the symbolic side. But of course, given the success of the AI machine learning side of AI, of course, now it's quite often the case that we do use the agent container just to encapsulate the part of the learning that we need to combine in our systems. So more and more we do have agents, sometimes not so called agents, but they are basically agents according to our definition, that just are used to encapsulate sub-symbolic computation with neural network, things like that you already know about, that mostly exploit the so-called sub-symbolic side of AI, the dark side of the agent. And then, of course, we need to take some step back. Because now we do have some of the answer, but just at the beginning. We know that you want to understand what is the sort of agents that we expect to take the stage, in the next 20 years to become the core component for our intelligence systems, encompassing all what we know of artificial intelligence techniques today, including all the different techniques that finally we need to put a few together for the future way. Okay? And so, first of all, of course, as usual, we take a step back and we try to understand what the cognition process is or should be, what is in humans, and what should be then in agents. Of course, you will see here in the next slides and here in the next slides, several times we use this kind of approach to science, which is science by analogy, which is not really a good way to proceed, per se. So this, there, like that, so we take that and we move here, it does work. Maybe science by analogy is a good starting point, but it's not scientific per se. But in the agent field, it did work a lot. It did work for agent communication languages. It did work for ADI architecture. It did work several times. Of course, again, it's just a starting point. Okay, but it's quite common to look, for instance, the artificial intelligence area, to look at what intelligence is, and then try to understand what intelligence should be in our software component. Okay, and then of course, this is not a point of arrival, this is a starting point, and that should be quite clear. So, what the starting point? One of the possible starting point here. Well, for those who had some philosophy in their course of study, you may remember our beloved Blaise Pascal, the philosopher there, that was basically clearly distinguished the hard work that he was doing as a mathematician, the hard, difficult, rational reasoning that his work as a mathematician, as a geometrician, was requiring to him. And he called that the esprit de géométrie. And then, of course, when instead he was talking about love or faith, he was invoking the existence of sort of intuitive process, which was fast, not so reliable as rational thinking, but fast and easy in a sense. And it was called, that was called for him the esprit de finesse. So, the important part of his thinking was explained to us the different realm and reaches of the esprit de finesse versus the esprit de géométrie. And then, of course, if you also move to other areas like psychology, okay, you may see a very huge distinction between two currents, cognitivism against behaviorism, which basically can be described by a picture like that. You see behavior, I'm sorry, it should work, but it doesn't. Sorry. Okay. Behavior as a result of two different ways to think and to evaluate, and the first one, the analytical one, based on explicit knowledge, and you can clearly understand the mapping with what you're seeing to now. And on the other hand, the intuitive way of reasoning, based instead with some implicit knowledge, typically based on procedural method. Okay, so that is not something that is born in the computer science or the artificial intelligence field. It's something that we bring with us since, well, at least 400 years with Pascal, and some decades with psychologists, and we probably may find something else in similar areas as well. And then, of course, again, analogy is not per se science, but we can see clearly a match between the hard, slow way in which symbolic approaches like logic, programming, or logic in general work in an AI, and the analytical, declarative memory, explicit knowledge part of that distinction, and on the other hand, the intuitive, fast way, implicit way of machine learning. So in a sense, by analogy, we can see there a rough match between classic AI and machine learning based AI. And also, we may imagine that since we are reasoning about how to build components for this kind of systems, a good component should somehow encompass both. But of course, we cannot just put things inside and think that, okay, it will be okay, everything will work. Okay, it's not like that. So we need now to take, well, we need, I just do this, if you are forced to do this with me, we would like that to take a particular stance and see if that particular stance, this particular viewpoint, can drive us towards some more specific ideas about how these things can work together, how we can build up a model that region can could encompass. Well, solve in principle the problem that we know they exist and also provide us with some fundamental bricks for actually doing the engineering of the kind of system. Okay? Of course, again, we take, first of all, let's take back what are intelligent systems nowadays. Well, for those of my generation, software engineering was also a place for use cases where you do have humans, you know the humans in the case studies, in use case, you know, that. And then on the other part, we do have the systems, okay, the software. Well, the world does no longer work like that, okay? We need to stably consider the perspective of social technical system. And of course, in the area of intelligent system, this means intelligent social technical system, which means places where you, systems where you do have units, actors, say, that encapsulate knowledge, intelligence, goals, activity. And these units might be humans, or might be software agents, or hardware agents. Okay, anyway, maybe humans or artificial agents. And when you start, you may not even know what is what. Okay, so since we are still trying to understand the nature of the components here, now our question here, our one main question here becomes, what should be the shape of the basic abstraction for intelligent, so for components of intelligence social technical systems? One of the, well, nowadays, so many people are doing that. Why? Not just because there's money, but because there's a lot of pressure, okay? There's pressure because everyone has decided that now AI works. I'm in the generation that I was introduced to AI when we were full of hope at the very beginning. It was a fifth generation, Japanese fifth generation project working. And then 92 came and it was a failure, and we had the winter of AI, and then we had, again, robotics with Brooks. We do have the subsampling architecture, things start to work again, and then of course they didn't work really well. So we did have this up and downs. Nowadays, maybe, we are in the, for sure we are in the upside. For sure, we know that people have a certain idea that there might be intelligence in the system that they are interacting with. So now people interact with Siri or Alexa, and they get angry when Siri or Alexa do not understand them. Okay? This means that they take as given the fact that there must be intelligence enough in the system to understand them. But of course, the problem is also the other way around. Now, in order for people to trust systems, we need people to understand systems. Of course, this is a problem. before this technical problem, it's a social problem, because you know your friends in the social networks. You know how they are. You didn't know how they were before you had social networks. Now you understand better the complication of explaining things. Many of you have a course in university, and they consider it difficult to explain to very bright students that you have. But now consider to explain complex things to the people around that are not in the university, not your students, the people that say very horrible things in social network around. Okay? And then you understand maybe the social problem of this kind of system. These people need to be included in the social technical system, need to participate, and need to have some understanding of the system they have to interact for their life, for their work. Okay? Humans need explanation. That should be something that we accept. We can no longer, it was just a big wave. Okay? We got it, and that's done. Okay? Humans need explanation. Okay? Humans want to understand. There's no longer like software engineering of old declined software developer and keep a distance. This is no longer viable. This can no longer work. Okay. And then of course we may focus on one of the sources of the problem, which is the fact that we don't have technologies that have a solid and ground base for being explained and for being understood. Of course, we know that it's quite easy with logic-based approaches, symbolic approaches, to be translated in some way with summaries, with a lot of techniques around, okay? So somehow, in some transparent representation of what the system did or why it took some decision or something like that. But then we have the machine learning techniques nowadays that are basically compatible. The point is, symbolic approaches are slow. The hard thinking, the expression geometry, Pascal, instead, some symbolic approaches fast, and they do work. With some limitation, but they do work. Okay? So of course, it's not that just everybody is doing explainable artificial intelligence. Now, in the last year, everybody is doing integration of symbolic and non-symbolic approaches. Okay? So, we are not doing that today. We are trying to understand what the agent abstraction has to say about that. Should we take some consequence from that in the real basic agent model, in the real basic agent architecture, to make it the proper component for intelligence system that had some, that can be considered as explainable from the root, from the very beginning. So it's not something that we add to the system, but it's something that is just born in the system. Okay? So we're trying to understand here which could be the conceptual foundation for integrating symbolic and sub-symbolic technique within a coherent agent model, within a coherent agent architecture. Then, of course, if you had a look at the literature and explainability, interpretability, and things like that, you may have found the typical problems, but one in particular, of any new field. Maybe you are too young to have seen so many new fields, but typically when the new field emerges, you do have a lot of buzzwords and a lot of different interpretations for the same words, a lot of different and possibly non-compatible definitions of the same concept, and some instead definitions that are the same but refer to different words. So it's the typical classical confusion that happens when the new, fertile, and very important field of research just emerges. Okay? We are not worried about this. What does worry, should worry us is that since it's, well, the cycle research, engineering, society system back, it was like 20, 25 years, some years ago, some decades ago. Now it's so fast. It's really fast. So we do find this kind of concept already in our regulations. And this is dangerous, of course. So if you take the GDPR, you find the right to explanation of citizens, and we have not defined what an explanation is. Or we have done this so many times and in so many different ways that we do have a collection of definition for explanation that basically have nothing in common with each other. Okay, apart from the name. So you go through the literature and you find that. So of course, I will not declare or legitimate one definition of another. Just try to stick to what I need today. And of course, when you try to, well, to go towards some scientific result, you try to simplify things. Okay, so first thing you separate those who explain, explanators, and those who got the explanation, and you try to stick with the idea that there is an act by explanators that I could call explanation. And of course, explanation as a process is a really dialectic thing, okay, that involves both parties. But here, since also, because we are focusing on what agents should be, we just start by finding a definition, the next slide, that can help us in going ahead. And then, of course, we can focus on after that, in the cognitive process of the explaining. And of course, one of the worst places to explain things is mathematics. Why? Because the objects of the explanation are actually never accessible to the poor guys that are here, that they are listening to the explanation. No rectangle exists. There's just an abstract idea. The only way in which a pupil can access the idea of square or rectangle or circle is just through a representation of it. The objects of the learning is totally abstract, and there's no way to directly assess it. That's why math is so hard. It's so hard to understand, but of course, at the very beginning, it's so hard to explain. Then, of course, mathematical researchers are the strongest in trying to understand what an explanation is, because they have the hardest work of all. Okay, so they basically, well, noetics is sort of a term that maybe you have met in the early Plato or Aristotle. They're slightly different notion of noetics, but basically the idea is that noetics is the final goal of any teaching, of any explanation. So the conceptual acquisition of an object by basically the explanation. Okay. But then is there the semiotics here is what you need to, how can I say, invoke when you cannot access the object of discussion. So you need to pass through an intermediate stage with this representation by signs. Okay, and this, of course, is exactly what you recall when you think or when you learn the first geometry or the first mathematics. That was your teacher trying to induce the direct process as a cognition process in yourself while experimenting with semiotics. Okay, and desperately trying a couple of things. Okay, first of all, trying to provide you with different representation of the same object. Okay, and different representation of the same object could be through two different kinds of transformation. So, for instance, if you have, I don't know, a curve on a plan, and I want to explain you that like a straight line, okay? A straight line. I can draw it and explain to you through Cartesian coordinates, or I can make a transformation of treatment in the same register, okay, same register, and try to do that with a polar coordinate. Still a straight line in a plan, so we have the same register of semiotic, but I've done a transformation of treatment. Or I can do a transformation of conversion and try with the equational representation of a straight line. Okay, y equal x, whatever. Okay, and that's the desperate attempt by the teacher to make you understand curves, for instance, okay, geometry, okay. And so a good way to look at explanation from explainer point of view, so what should I do when I try to explain, is first of all, to generate a symbolic representation, semiotic representation of the object I want to explain, and then to help you understand, try some transformation, providing you with other representations of the same object. Okay? This is called the transformation of the semiotic register. Of course, this is the viewpoint of the explanator. Okay? And then, of course, if you want to imagine the dialectical interpretation of that, of the explanation, you may imagine that I, as a teacher, for instance, I will generate new semiotic representation, transform my semiotic representation of the object based on your reaction. I see blank faces in my explanation, so okay, I will try with another representation, try to transform. Okay, so that's how the interpretation, definition of explanation given here can also become the starting point for dialectic interpretation of explanation. Okay, and then we need to answer another question. Because if you go through the literature, I've done this for you in a couple of papers, so we did a lot of surveys before we started that. What we see is that explainability is again the UML use cases. You have humans and you have systems. Okay? And this is not good. This is not enough. So this is not enough. Because okay, there is that dimension. And again, most of the literature work with this. Explainers are software components, and the explainees, so those guys called explanation, are the humans. This is important, we need to do that. But is that enough? Because basically we have two units now, two actors now, artificial agents and humans. And if we put explanation in the middle, we have at least 4 couples. We have, of course, artificial system explaining to humans, and of course we know that we have humans explaining to humans. I'm here trying to explain myself to you. We know about humans trying to be understood by artificial software system, okay? But what is missing, we are not even considering the idea of software components explaining to other software components. This is basically missing in all the literature till now. And maybe we need to explore that. And we need to reason about complex multi-agent systems with very heterogeneous agents. Because maybe in the early 20s, talking about legacy intelligence components is too early, but year goes along quite fast. And maybe at the end of the 20s, we will have a number of legacy intelligence components that will be there and we will want to work with our new intelligence components. So we already have some systems trying to aggregate very different notions of intelligent techniques. Okay, and maybe we will have intelligent systems. We like to have intelligent systems exploiting every possible source of knowledge and intelligence. How can we try to go beyond, I don't know, interoperability? With very low level, it's essential that's very low level, we need more. Because we need intelligence components that really understand each other and build up intelligent systems, possibly more intelligent than the singular system, the individual systems, okay? So how, the question is, how could now and in the future, highly, usually heterogeneous intelligent agent effectively interact with the multi-agent system? What is the conceptual foundation for this? What happens if we have the same question using humans instead of intelligence agents in that question? And why we do that? Because we are trying to use the general perspective of intelligent social-technical systems. So at some level, the question should be the same. And we go to biology, anthropology, and ethology. And there we learn one important thing. What does separate humans from all the other species, and in particular from all the other intelligent animals, including primates or dolphins? It is not our brains. That is definitely not the point. The main, because we do have, you know, if you look at primates, they use artifacts, they use tools. They somehow teach their children how to use tools, sticks, things like that. Chimpanzees do that. They do not share that knowledge in the community. The main human trait is sharing knowledge. You may have experimented in your community sometime in the last years. One of them, we did that, we had that in Italy. Sort of a refusal of science. We did it a few years ago. It was quite evident. We are just trying to overcome that, but I see that happened in other places in the world, different time, but it happened. Why is that? There are several reasons, of course, political reason, social reason, but one thing is clear. When science becomes something just for specialists, it develops its own languages, and people do not understand that anymore. And this is a capital sin for humans, because we are made for sharing knowledge. When we build up artificial buildings made of language, made of artifacts, made of documents that people cannot understand in no way, that's where they talk us as those in the ivory towers. Okay? Because we are not sharing anymore. If you go to any site, prehistorical site, where they have stones and things like that, you always find a place, a communal place, where, I don't know, stone were worked, artifact was built. It's always a common place, where knowledge about tools could be shared. Okay? So, knowledge shared is a real trait of humanity, is the way in which we do understand each other, is the way in which we learn, okay, is basically the real foundation of human society as we know it, and the effect is our human culture is a cumulative one. How can we do that? Okay, for instance, human science is exactly an example of that. That's why we insist so much in our ivory towers that artifacts should be understandable at least that other people in the same community. We talk about reproducibility, refutability. This needs shared artifacts that everybody in the community can understand and use. Okay, so again, our culture, including scientific culture, is cumulative. We share and accumulate culture. Okay, and sharing is rational. Of course, we know that we can share our emotions, looking in our eyes, or hugging, or things like that. But it's not something that can be used as a stable basis for the sharing of our human knowledge. Cumulative culture of humans is based on rational artifacts, rational tools, representation tools like language, okay, which is the basic cognitive artifacts of humans. And then, of course, we need also physical artifacts. So we invented writing of language, and we do have books. We do have now the web, okay. We do have this kind of hybrid artifacts, which are both computational and physical, which are computers or smartphones, things like that, okay? So, sharing knowledge, even implicit knowledge, in a stable way requires rational representation and typically rational explanation. Because when we, for instance, when we think about knowing someone, is not just to know what he does say or does, okay? Just we know his or her motivation, goals, okay? Not that we can read them, but we can have explanation of them. So typically, for instance, felt understood when we can explain ourselves. So explanation built as a rational representation of what we have is also used for representing our intuitive implicit knowledge. So what happened to edges? Well, a possible line of reasoning is considering that maybe knowledge sharing should work in the same way with agents too. So maybe a heterogeneous multi-agent system would work really well when agents could share knowledge between them, among them, in the same way humans do. So not just inter-agent communication. We know in the 90s, the main problem of agents was building agent communication languages, but it was 30 years ago. Okay, and then we built ontologies. So we faced the syntactic and semantics problem for communication. But of course, nowadays we understand that it's not enough for agent A to know that agent B believes phi, whatever is phi. We did have the, I don't know if some of you remember, we did have the Arco semantics for agent communication language. And we did also laugh at that. Why? Because the first semantic for agent communication language was based on one simple assumption. An agent could communicate phi only when it was really believing phi. Why we were laughing at it? Because the first application of a multi-agent system were e-commerce. And we know that commerce and sincerity do not cope so much well together, okay? But in the end, even that was not enough. It was just the beginning. Again, it's not enough for a system to work knowing that B sincerely believes that. What A needs to know in order to satisfy is that A understands why B believes phi. It's exactly the same way that we should do that. Okay, we typically, we know that our friend says that, but then we ask him why he does say that. Okay, we need to share the motivation, the cause, and things like that. Okay, so possibly we should apply that for agents also to those, to that part of knowledge which is acquired through machine learning, to sub-symbolic techniques. Which needs, some sort of symbolic representation and possibly transformation, like we mentioned before, in order to be shared rationally among heterogeneous agents. Okay. So the idea is that we can build agents with complex cognitive process using whatever kind of technique we like. And it's not just sub-symbolic. We may, of course, have very complex logic agents that we cannot just represent the logic process. That would be too complex too. So we need also techniques like, again, summarization and things like that. Okay. Anyway, any kind of complex agent cognitive process would really benefit to be shared. So now the idea is that intelligent agents should be prepared not just to share the results of their intelligent activity, but also the cognitive process that have led them to those results. Okay, that should be the conceptual, solid conceptual grounding foundation for intelligence agents working as the fundamental bricks for explainable intelligence systems. Okay, so we did face the syntactic problem of communication, the semantic problem of communication, and now we need to face the element of the causes, the common causes of the beliefs of the agents. Okay, and the basic idea, we should focus also on the part of agents able to explain themselves to other agents. First of all, okay, and so the idea is that we should move in the next 10, 20 years, or maybe 10 or 5 or 10 years, I don't know. Things are moving so fast, but also they are so complex, so I really don't have a time representation for this work. We need to move anyway toward agent-based. If I fall, Roberto, I'm quite near to that. Okay, so go and save me. Okay, so we need to go toward intelligence system made of explanation-ready agents. Okay, they should be equipped on the one hand on the ability to make some intelligent reasoning process of some way, but then able also to provide a rational and shareable representation of that specific cognitive process. And possibly, in order to enact the, to have the possibility to have a dialectic explanation process, also able to transform that representation in whatever way would help the other agents to understand their reasoning process. Okay, so we can imagine architecture of agents equipped with their explanation model. Which techniques? Well, of course, there are so many techniques around. We have a lot of work done, even in my group, of course, in all the work, about, for instance, knowledge injection, knowledge extraction, all the kind of integration, integration for symbolic techniques and symbolic techniques. This is not the point. The point here that whatever techniques you find it apt and fit for that particular rational agent or no rational agent, should be the one that you put in your explanation module. That should be the core, the foundation for any agent communication with other agents. Okay? And also, of course, we have the question of knowledge, because if you want to not just provide a rational explanation, but be able to change your explanation, you need to have enough knowledge about the domain of this course to perform those transformation of register or other transformation that could help other agents understanding why you did say so. Okay, so maybe if you want to have an example, this is something that we are actually working on in the ESC by Giovanni Sartor, which is computable law. Okay, if you have multi-agent systems with very, really heterogeneous agents, some symbolic agent doing some symbolic reasoning on some corpus represented logically, some totally different agents using any sort of machine learning algorithm over huge corpuses of laws, and then you want to put them together and provide you some help with some legal decisions of deliberation. You really don't want to get all the different answers from all the different agents. Maybe you would like the agent to talk with each other and find a common understanding of some possible shared proposal that could be given to human decision makers without having the huge complexity of handling all the kind of information risen by all the different agents. Okay, and of course this requires that agents should be able to explain the same rational form, not just with humans, but also with others. Possibly exploiting. One way is the way that we are using now with the group of Giovanni Sartori and Roberta Calegali, argumentation techniques, which is very fertile area in this. So in the end, the last slide, the concluding thesis is that first, explanation should be an essential tool for any intelligent component. Of course, we call it agency. Intelligent agents should be able to explicitly represent both the cognitive process and the result, whatever is the nature of the cognitive process. Okay? And then, of course, they should be able to manipulate those representations in order to give more chances to their ability to explain themselves. And then, of course, the first targets of the explanation should be other agents. And of course, finally, we can't do this without symbolic techniques, because rational representation requires symbolic techniques. Thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, so we just got time for a couple of quick questions.
First of all, Andrea, thank you for the brilliant talk, really. Let me say, it's quite tough, it's not easy to follow the thread. I appreciate it, really. And what I want to put in place, because the perspective you mentioned about the type of communication, human to humans, human for couples, is really something new. And I have to ask you two questions. You said that there is no any state of heart in the agent to agent. This is the first question. So you make some, let's say, consistent analysis on that because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Another aspect, we were involved into Armando is a postdoc in Italian project with the Ministero della Giustizia. I think also Bologna is a part of
Yes.
Yeah. In case we can, you know, it's a matter of exchange because we understood from Andrea, thank you, we live next sharing, and I never thought that, it's true. And we're trying to approach the legal process, and I understood there was some knowledge in this perspective. So the second question is, let's say, the maturity of our human agent in the area of law and understanding what they have in mind, because it's really tough stuff. So these two aspects, agent to agent, you can say something more, it's really appreciated because I think there's a room, and thank you for that, and specifically for local process, because there was some experience, what you foresee in the interaction, it was quite tough for us to talk with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, you touched some very delicate problems, but I really hope that it was clear from my not so fun introduction that I was just trying to provide lines for things that still have to be done. So, well, we are doing that, but for instance, in the, before doing that, I was involved in some work in what someone calls conversational informatics. And when you walk through conversational informatics, you understand one first thing, that we are at the very beginning of a long journey where we really need to equip our intelligence system of so many different things before we can really have a full-fledged conversation between humans and intelligence systems. Because now, well, the very beginning of human system, computer interface was basically trying to bring down humans to systems. And now we do have this kind of illusion that some natural language understanding or some natural language processing, some speech processing, just because we have done this for the last 30 years, is really done. It is not. We are really at the very beginning. We don't have the ability to reach the context automatically. We don't have the ability to keep up well with all the many different source of knowledge and information that each individual have. We don't have the ability to understand the cumulative culture. You may remember that there was some good work done in Trento years ago at the end of the 90s about implicit culture. But then it stopped there. But we do need to resume that also for humans. That was implicit culture for agents, but we need to incorporate, for instance, implicit culture for humans before our system understand what's going on in conversation with human and participate. Okay. There's a lot of work by psychologists and sociologists in human conversations, in the human perception of what is weird and what is normal. Okay, we have those graphs of the uncanny valley. You know, when for instance, when artificial systems try to mimic humans and they fail, we don't have just failure. We just have people that reject systems. Okay, so we do have a lot of things that we have to fix in our system, like attitudes, physical distance, faces, expressions, emotions. All those things are necessary before we do have a natural conversation with artificial systems. So there's a lot of work to do there. That's why I think that it would be better now to concentrate and focus on agent-to-agent conversation. We can do that faster because agents don't have our millions of years of, I don't know, eye-to-eye conversation, which is not something for humans, it's just for animals. It's just something that's so gravely scripted in our DNA that without eye-to-eye conversation, we cannot really have a conversation. So agents, for instance, need not to have an eye-to-eye conversation. This should be easier. Okay, so there should be an easier way to follow. And then, of course, there's a lot to do there too. There are attempts. Of course, this is not something I invented. It's something that everyone is trying to do. Is trying to do some complex system like the one in your project is forced to face because you have a lot of sources of knowledge and intelligence, and you don't want them to face that all humans. So you start to do that, and you understand the limitations of agent communication languages and ontologies and things like that, which are great. They work, but they're not enough.
Okay, thank you. And just a very quick one, 30 seconds, no more, because we have to go to the coffee break. If it is very quick, yes. If it is long, Andrea, a quick.
Yeah, that was no way, no fast answer.
I apologize for that.
No fast.
Just a short question.
No, I thank you for that. How you evaluate the scalability of this system, the performance?
That's
Because
really.
if
That's,
you have a
yeah.
very big system with many agents, it's a problem to interpret all languages, especially in an open system. Any agent has his word, so he cannot understand immediately.
It's perfect. Your question.
10 seconds.
Yeah. You evaluating, for instance, just for evaluating the performance of an explanation by an agent, would be more or less the same as evaluating the performance of a teacher explaining. And we know that is very difficult. But in a sense, we can measure the performance of a human class somehow. But maybe we will have metrics for the performance of systems, and then indirectly we could somehow measure the effectiveness of the agent explanation. That's
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Andrea. coffee break is now, but the ones among you would like to go to Tropea for the trip, 4 o'clock. Okay, don't be late because you know the bus will leave you here. Okay.